13 feet underground. A passage so narrow your shoulders scrape both walls. No light, no room to stand, no room to turn around. The air is thick, hot, and smells like wet clay, and something else, something human. You're crawling forward on your elbows because your knees don't fit side by side in this space. Somewhere ahead, in the darkness, something just moved. You can't raise a rifle here. You can't swing a knife. The soldier who went into this tunnel before you came back in a bag. The one before him didn't come back at all. The only thing between you and whatever is waiting around the next corner is a pump-action shotgun with no safety switch, a rough finish that cuts into your palms, and a reputation so ugly that Marines called it the sewer pipe. You wrap your finger around the trigger of the Ithaca 37. You pump the action. The sound, that heavy, metallic chunk echoes through hundreds of feet of tunnel in every direction. And for a moment, everything ahead of you goes silent. What happens in the next 2 seconds is the reason the Viet Cong feared this weapon more than anything else America brought to Vietnam. But to understand why this ugly shotgun became the most feared weapon underground, you first need to understand what was waiting for American soldiers beneath the jungles of Cu Chi. By the end of this video, you'll understand how a shotgun designed to hunt ducks in upstate New York became the single most effective killing tool in the most terrifying battlefield of the Vietnam War. You'll understand exactly what made this weapon work in a place where every other gun in the American arsenal failed. And you'll learn something about the way the Viet Cong reacted to the sound of this shotgun, a detail that almost never gets mentioned when this story is told. But that changes everything you think you know about what fear looked like underground. It starts with the tunnels themselves. The Vietnam War wasn't just fought in jungles and rice paddies. Beneath the surface, the Viet Cong had spent decades building something that the American military had never encountered before: a network of underground tunnels stretching over 150 miles across the Cu Chi district, just 40 miles northwest of Saigon. These weren't crude hiding holes. They were entire underground cities, 3 levels deep in some places, hospitals where surgeons operated by candlelight, kitchens with ventilation systems designed to disperse smoke so thin that American patrols above couldn't detect it, weapons caches, command centers, sleeping quarters for thousands. And the passages connecting all of it were built for Vietnamese fighters, men who averaged 5'2" and 110 pounds. Some tunnels were barely 2 feet wide and 2.5 feet tall. An average American soldier at 5'10" could not stand, could not kneel, could barely crawl. But the size wasn't the real danger. The tunnels were engineered to kill anyone who entered uninvited. Bamboo stakes smeared with poison or human waste, hidden in covered pits. Sections rigged with tripwires, connected to grenades or explosive charges. Blind corners every few meters, sharp 90-degree turns, where a Viet Cong fighter could be waiting with a weapon 1 arm's length away. Venomous snakes, crates, cobras, sometimes placed deliberately in narrow sections, flooded passages that forced you to submerge completely, not knowing what was on the other side. The American military couldn't ignore them. These tunnel systems weren't just hiding spots. They were operational headquarters. Ambushes on American patrols were launched from tunnel entrances and vanished back into them within seconds. Weapons, documents, intelligence, all stored underground. The tunnels were winning the war beneath the war. The Americans had to go in. But here was the problem: that no one in Washington had planned for every single weapon in the American arsenal had been designed for open field combat. Rifles, machine guns, grenades, air support, none of it worked in a space where you couldn't stand up straight. And the moment American soldiers started going underground with the wrong weapons, they started dying in ways that never made the evening news. The first American soldiers who went into the tunnels went in with what they had: their standard issue M16 rifles. It was a disaster. The M16 was over 39 inches long. In a tunnel passage barely 2.5 feet wide, with 90-degree turns every few meters, you physically could not swing the barrel around a corner fast enough. By the time you angled the rifle into position, whatever was waiting on the other side had already fired. But the length wasn't even the worst part. When you fire an M16 in an enclosed underground space, a tube of packed earth with no ventilation, three things happen simultaneously. The muzzle flash blinds you. In total darkness, your eyes are fully dilated, and a single shot produces a flash bright enough to destroy your night vision for 15 to 20 seconds. The concussion, the sheer pressure wave of the blast bouncing off walls, inches from your face, disorients you, disrupts your balance, makes it impossible to tell which direction you're facing. And the noise. A single M16 round in an open field registers around 165 decibels. In a tunnel, that sound has nowhere to go. It hits the walls, bounces back, hits you. Soldiers reported temporary deafness, lasting minutes after a single shot. Minutes during which they were crawling blind, deaf, and disoriented in a space filled with traps and enemy fighters. Some units tried grenades. The result was predictable. The blast could collapse the tunnel on top of the soldier who threw it. You were as likely to bury yourself alive as you were to hit the enemy. Flamethrowers worked from the outside. You could pump fire into a tunnel entrance and burn out whatever was near the surface. But the deeper sections, the second and third levels, were protected by water traps and sharp bends, specifically designed to stop flame and gas from penetrating. And you certainly couldn't carry a flamethrower inside. The American military had the most advanced arsenal on the planet. Jet fighters, napalm, helicopter gunships, artillery that could flatten a grid square in minutes. And none of it, not a single piece of it, could touch a man sitting in a tunnel 13 feet underground. So they found men who were willing to go down there themselves. They called them tunnel rats. The selection criteria were simple and brutal. You had to be small, preferably 5'6" or shorter. You had to volunteer, though volunteer was a flexible word in Vietnam. And you had to be willing to crawl into a hole in the ground, alone, knowing that the man who went in before you might not have come back. The standard tunnel rat loadout was almost primitive. A Colt M1911, a one pistol, the .45 caliber sidearm that had been in service since before World War I, a flashlight, a knife, sometimes a bayonet. That was it. The .45 was better than the M16 underground. It was short enough to use in tight spaces. The muzzle flash was less blinding. It was a genuine weapon for close quarters combat. But it had 7 rounds. 7. In total darkness, against an enemy who knew every inch of the tunnel system, who knew where the traps were, where the dead ends were, where the hidden chambers were. 7 rounds meant you had 7 chances to hit a target you couldn't see, at a distance you couldn't judge, in a space where missing once could mean dying before you chambered the next round. The tunnel rats were extraordinarily brave men. Some of them cleared dozens of tunnels. Some of them became legends within their units. But the casualty rate was staggering. The life expectancy of a tunnel rat on a bad day was measured in minutes, and even the ones who survived carried psychological damage that no metal could fix. The tunnel rats were solving part of the problem. They were going underground, but the .45 wasn't enough. 7 rounds, 1 flashlight, total darkness. And the Viet Cong knew those tunnels like the back of their hand. Every turn, every trap, every hidden exit. What the Americans needed wasn't just brave men willing to go down. They needed a weapon that changed the rules of fighting in a space where every rule had been designed to kill them. And that weapon already existed. It had been sitting in military warehouses since 1937. It just took the worst battlefield on Earth to reveal what it was actually built for. The answer didn't come from a military research lab. It didn't come from a Pentagon weapons program. It didn't come from the billions of dollars the United States was pouring into the war effort every year. It came from a gun factory in a small town in upstate New York. The Ithaca Gun Company had been making firearms in Ithaca, New York, since 1880, mostly shotguns for hunters, farmers, sportsmen, men who shot ducks and pheasants on autumn mornings. In 1937, they released the Model 37, a pump-action shotgun designed for exactly that kind of life: hunting birds, shooting clay targets on a Saturday afternoon. It was not a military weapon. It was not designed for combat. It had a rough, utilitarian finish, no polish, no elegance, nothing that said modern warfare. Soldiers who first saw it compared it to a piece of plumbing. Marines had a name for it that stuck: the sewer pipe. Nobody looked at the Ithaca 37 and thought, this is the weapon that's going to change underground combat forever. But the Ithaca 37 had something that no one had considered until American soldiers started dying in tunnels. It had a set of design features that purely by accident solved every single problem that made underground fighting a death sentence. Every single one. Start with the shells. When a standard shotgun fires, the spent shell casing ejects out of a port on the side of the receiver. In an open field, that's meaningless. The casing flies out, lands on the ground, you keep shooting. But in a tunnel 2 feet wide, that casing hits the wall 6 inches from your face. It bounces back. It burns your skin. It lands in your collar, your equipment, your sleeve. In the worst case, it jams back into the ejection port and locks the weapon. In a firefight in total darkness, at a distance of 5 feet, a jammed weapon means you're dead before you can clear it. The Ithaca 37 ejected its spent shells downward, straight out of the bottom of the receiver. In a tunnel, the casing dropped between your arms into the dirt. No bounce, no burn, no jam. A design choice made in 1937 for the convenience of left-handed duck hunters just solved a lethal problem 30 years later in a war zone on the other side of the planet. Now the safety. Most military firearms have an external safety switch, a mechanical lever or button that prevents the gun from firing until you deliberately disengage it. In normal combat, this is essential. You don't want a weapon firing accidentally while you're running, climbing, or falling. But in a tunnel, you're not running. You're not climbing. You're lying on your stomach in the dark, and the enemy is somewhere in front of you, possibly 3 feet away. In that situation, the half-second it takes to find the safety switch with your thumb in the dark, with sweat-soaked hands, while your heart is beating so hard you can hear it in your skull, that half-second is the difference between firing first and dying first. The Ithaca 37 had no external safety mechanism in its original military configuration. You picked it up, you pumped it, you pulled the trigger. No switch, no delay. No half-second of fumbling that could cost you your life. Then the barrel. The standard M16 was 39.5 inches long, in a tunnel with 90-degree turns. That length made it nearly impossible to maneuver. The Ithaca 37, with its barrel cut to 20 inches, came in at just over 37 inches total. But the critical difference wasn't just the numbers. A shotgun's action is fundamentally different from a rifle's. You hold it closer to your body. The weight distribution lets you sweep it side to side in a confined space without losing control. In a tunnel where you couldn't raise your arms above your head, the Ithaca could be aimed, or close enough to aimed, from a crawling position in a way that no rifle could match. And then there was the spread. A rifle fires a single projectile, in total darkness, at a distance you can't judge, against a target you can't see. You have to aim precisely. With a pistol, the same problem: one bullet, one trajectory, and if you miss by 2 inches, you might as well have missed by 2 miles. A 1-2 gauge shotgun, loaded with double-aught buckshot fires 9.33 caliber pellets simultaneously. At tunnel distances 3 to 15 feet, those pellets spread into a pattern that covers the entire width of the passage. You didn't need to aim. You didn't need to see your target. You pointed the weapon in the general direction of the threat, and pulled the trigger, and everything in that tunnel section in front of you was hit. In a space where you couldn't see, couldn't stand, and couldn't miss without dying, an Ithaca 37 meant you didn't have to. 4 design features, 4 problems solved. An ugly, cheap, 30-year-old bird-hunting shotgun was quietly becoming the most effective weapon the American military had ever brought underground. But there was one feature of the Ithaca 37 that turned it from a good tunnel weapon into something genuinely terrifying, something that no other standard-issue shotgun in the American military could do. And it's the reason the Viet Cong didn't just fear this weapon, they gave it a name. The Ithaca 37 had a design feature that was considered a flaw. In most pump-action shotguns, the firing mechanism includes a component called a disconnector. Its job is simple. It ensures that every time you want to fire, you have to release the trigger and pull it again. One pump, one deliberate trigger pull, one shot. It's a safety measure. It prevents accidental discharges. Every modern shotgun has one. The Ithaca 37 didn't. The engineers at Ithaca Gun Company in 1937 had designed the Model 37 without a trigger disconnector. Whether this was a cost-saving decision, a design oversight, or a deliberate choice for faster follow-up shots during bird hunting, nobody knows for certain. But the result was something that no other standard-issue shotgun in the American military could do. If you held down the trigger and pumped the action, the gun fired every single time the action closed. No pause, no second trigger pull, no deliberate decision between shots. Just pump fire, pump fire, pump fire, as fast as your arm could cycle the action. They called it slam fire. A trained soldier could empty 5 rounds of 1-2 gauge double-aught buckshot in under 2 seconds. That's 45 and 3.3 caliber pellets, filling a tunnel passage in less time than it takes to blink twice. At distances of 3 to 10 feet, in a space 2 feet wide, with a spread pattern that covered wall to wall, nothing survived it. Nothing. Think about what this meant in a tunnel. You're crawling in total darkness. You hear movement ahead. You don't know if it's 1 fighter or 3. You don't know if there's a trap between you and them. You can't see anything. With a .45 pistol, you have 7 carefully aimed shots at a target you can't see. With the Ithaca 37 on slam fire, you hold the trigger, pump 5 times in 2 seconds, and 45 projectiles fill every cubic inch of the tunnel section in front of you. You didn't need to aim. You didn't need to see. You didn't even need to think. You just needed to pump. The tunnel rats who carried the Ithaca 37 described the moment everything changed underground. With a pistol, you were the hunted a man crawling into someone else's territory with an inadequate weapon, hoping to survive. With the Ithaca on slam fire, you were something else entirely. You were the thing in the dark that the other side was afraid of. The hunter became the hunted, and the Viet Cong knew it. But here's the part that almost never gets told. The Ithaca 37 didn't just kill in the tunnels. It did something that might have been even more militarily valuable. It terrorized, and the weapon that created that terror wasn't the buckshot. It was the sound. Underground, sound doesn't behave the way it does on the surface. There's no open air to absorb it, no wind to carry it away, no ambient noise to mask it. In a tunnel, sound travels through packed earth walls and reverberates through hundreds of feet of connected passages. A whisper can be heard 3 chambers away. A cough can give away your position from 50 meters. And the sound of an Ithaca 37's pump-action cycling, that heavy, deliberate, unmistakable chunk of steel on steel, could be heard resonating through an entire tunnel complex. The Viet Cong learned to recognize that sound. Not the blast of the shot. Every weapon made a blast. The pump, the cycling of the action. That metallic announcement that meant a shotgun was in the tunnel, and that whatever was coming next would fill the passage with pellets that you could not dodge, could not hide from, could not survive. According to accounts documented by Tom Mangold and John Pennicate in their definitive work, The Tunnels of Cu Chi, a book built on interviews with both American tunnel rats and former Viet Cong tunnel fighters. The five sound of a pump-action shotgun being cycled underground triggered an immediate response in experienced Viet Cong combatants. Many chose to retreat through secondary passages rather than engage. Not because they were cowards, these were fighters who had survived years of bombing, chemical defoliation, and ground assaults. They retreated because they understood the math. In a tunnel, against a shotgun with slam-fire capability, the odds were not survivable. Think about what that means. An entire section of a tunnel complex could be influenced, cleared, abandoned, redirected by a single soldier pumping a single shotgun, not by firing it, by pumping it. The sound alone was a weapon. No engineer at the Ithaca Gun Company in 1937 designed the Model 37 to create psychological terror in underground warfare. No military planner selected it for its acoustic properties in confined earth tunnels. It was an accident, a convergence of a design flaw, an impossible battlefield, and the physics of sound in enclosed spaces that produce something. No weapons program could have intentionally created a gun whose reputation preceded it through the walls. The Viet Cong didn't call it the Ithaca 37. They didn't call it a shotgun. The accounts suggest they referred to it simply as the weapon that screams before it kills. And in the tunnels of Chuchi, that scream was enough. But what made the Ithaca 37 truly feared wasn't just its firepower or its sound. It was what happened when real men took it into real tunnels, real encounters, in real darkness, with real consequences. And some of those stories have never been told properly. In January 1967, the 25th Infantry Division, known as Tropic Lightning, launched Operation Cedar Falls, the largest American ground operation of the war up to that point. The target was the Iron Triangle, a Viet Cong stronghold northwest of Saigon that sat directly above one of the most extensive tunnel networks in Vietnam. Thousands of soldiers swept the area. They burned villages, they cleared jungle, but the real war was underground. A soldier, we'll call him by his unit designation rather than his name, as many tunnel rats refused to be identified, in official records was assigned to clear a tunnel entrance discovered beneath a destroyed hut. He was 5'5". He had volunteered 3 times before. This was his 4th descent. He carried an Ithaca 37 with a 2.0-inch barrel, a flashlight taped to his wrist with electrical tape, and a .45 pistol strapped to his thigh as backup. He wore no helmet it wouldn't fit in the tunnels, no flak jacket too bulky, just a t-shirt, trousers, and the knowledge that the last man who had gone into this particular entrance had come back up with a bamboo stake through his forearm. The entrance dropped vertically for about 4 feet, then leveled into a horizontal passage heading northeast. He could feel the walls pressing against both shoulders. The air was suffocating over 100 degrees, humidity so thick it felt like breathing through a wet cloth. The smell was earth, decay, and something chemical, possibly residue from CS gas that had been pumped in days earlier. About 30 feet in, the passage split. 2 branches. No way to know which one was trapped. No way to know which one held fighters. He turned off his flashlight. In the absolute darkness, he listened. Nothing from the left branch. From the right, something. Not footsteps. Something softer. Fabric against earth. Someone repositioning. He pointed the Ithaca down the right branch. He held the trigger. He pumped 3 times in rapid succession. The slam fire filled the tunnel with a sound that survivors described as physically painful, not just loud but compressive, as if the air itself was being crushed. The muzzle flash lit the passage in 3 staccato bursts, each one freeze-framing the tunnel in white light. In those fractions of a second, he saw a figure, or what was left, of one less than 8 feet ahead. He cleared both branches. He found documents, rice stores, and a small arms cache. He came back up 40 minutes later. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't light a cigarette. He went down again the next day. That's one story. Here's another kind. During the same operation, a tunnel rat from the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, entered a tunnel complex near the village of Ben Suk, carrying an Ithaca 37. He was experienced. He had cleared tunnels before. He knew the weapon. He trusted it. 12 feet into the passage, the floor gave way. It was a punji trap, a concealed pit lined with sharpened bamboo stakes angled upward. The Ithaca didn't matter. The slam fire didn't matter. No weapon in the world could save you from the ground disappearing beneath you. He fell approximately 5 feet onto stakes that pierced both legs below the knee. The bamboo had been smeared with contaminated material, a common Viet Cong practice designed to ensure that even survivable wounds became infected. He survived. He was extracted by his team using ropes. He never walked without a limp again, and he never went into another tunnel. The Ithaca 37 was devastating in a firefight, but the tunnels were not just firefights. They were engineered killing systems, decades of design refined through 2 wars, first against the French and then against the Americans. The weapon could protect you from the enemy in front of you. It could not protect you from the floor beneath you, the ceiling above you, or the tripwire you couldn't see in the dark. Tunnel rats who carried the Ithaca 37 had better odds than those who carried only a pistol. But better odds in the tunnels of Chu Chi still meant terrible odds. Some went in and didn't come back, and the Ithaca was found next to them in the dirt, loaded, functional, irrelevant against a trap that didn't care what you were carrying. This matters, because the story of the Ithaca 37 underground is not a story of an invincible weapon. It's a story of the least terrible option in an impossible situation. And then there was the other side. After the war, interviews with former Viet Cong tunnel fighters, many conducted by Vietnamese historians and later corroborated in Mangold and Pennycate's research, revealed something that American soldiers had long suspected but never confirmed. The Viet Cong had a hierarchy of fear when it came to what they heard approaching in the tunnels. A flashlight beam meant an American was coming, manageable. The tunnels had been designed with sharp turns, specifically to block light from penetrating deep. A pistol shot the sharp crack of a .45 meant a tunnel rat was inside, but with limited firepower, dangerous, but engageable. The tunnel fighters knew they had the advantage of terrain, knowledge, and patience. They could wait behind a bend, in a hidden chamber, in a water trap, and let the American come to them. But the sound of a pump-action shotgun cycling that was different. That sound meant slam fire. It meant a wall of buckshot that filled the passage. It meant that the next 2 seconds would be unsurvivable if you were anywhere in the line of fire. Former Viet Cong fighters described the calculus as instant and non-negotiable. When you heard a shotgun pump underground, you moved, not toward it, away from it. Through secondary passages, through emergency exits, through connections that the Americans didn't know existed, you gave ground. You abandoned positions. You lived to fight in a tunnel section where the shotgun wasn't. A single tunnel rat with an Ithaca 37 could influence the behavior of an entire section of a tunnel complex without firing a single round. Not through firepower, through fear. And here's what I think makes this story worth telling. The most technologically advanced military in human history, a force that had nuclear weapons, supersonic aircraft, satellite communications, aircraft carrier battle groups, and a defense budget larger than most countries' entire economies, found that underground, in the dark, in a 2-foot-wide passage carved out of clay, all of that technology was worthless. Every single piece of it. And the weapon that actually worked, the one that gave American soldiers a fighting chance in the most terrifying combat environment of the war, was a pump-action shotgun designed during the Great Depression for shooting birds. It cost a fraction of what an M16 cost. It used technology from the 1930s. It looked like a piece of plumbing, and it was the most feared weapon in the tunnels of Cu Chi. Sometimes war doesn't reward the most advanced technology. Sometimes it rewards whatever works, and sometimes the ugliest tool in the shed is the one that saves your life. The Ithaca 37 wasn't the weapon that won Vietnam. Nothing won Vietnam. But its story didn't end in those tunnels. And what happened to this ugly shotgun after the war reveals something that most people don't expect. The war ended. The tunnels didn't. After Vietnam, the Ithaca 37 quietly transitioned into a second life. The LAPD adopted it. The NYPD carried it in patrol cars for decades. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police used it. Border agencies, prison systems, and SWAT teams across the United States kept it in their arsenals well into the 1990s. The same shotgun that had cleared Viet Cong tunnels was now clearing crack houses in Los Angeles and covering bank robberies in Manhattan. Updated versions of the Ithaca 37 are still manufactured today, nearly 90 years after the original design. The company has changed hands multiple times, gone through bankruptcy, been revived, but the Model 37 endures. It outlasted the war it became famous in. It outlasted the military that deployed it underground. It outlasted most of the men who carried it. And the tunnels of Cu Chi? They're a tourist attraction now. You can visit them. You can crawl inside. Though they had to widen the passages for Western tourists because the originals were too narrow for most Americans to fit through, some things haven't changed. There's a strange irony in that. Thousands of people every year pay money to crawl through a sanitized, expanded, well-lit version of the same tunnels where young men once faced the darkest kind of combat imaginable. Tour guides hand out flashlights. There's a gift shop at the exit. The passages that once smelled of blood and cordite and fear now smell like humidity and tourist sunscreen. But somewhere in the walls, in the original, unwidened sections that tourists never see, there are still marks, scrapes from equipment, gouges from weapons. The tunnels remember, even if the world has mostly forgotten what happened inside them. The Ithaca 37 was never the most beautiful weapon ever made. It was never the most advanced. It was never the one that got the magazine covers or the Hollywood close-ups. It looked like something your grandfather kept in a barn. It had the finish of a tool, not a weapon. Marines called it the sewer pipe, and honestly, they weren't wrong. But in the most terrifying combat environment of the Vietnam War, a place so narrow you couldn't raise your arms, so dark you couldn't see your own hands, so dangerous that survival was measured in minutes, this ugly, rough, 30-year-old pump-action shotgun was the one thing that worked. Not the M16, not the grenades, not the flamethrowers, not the billions of dollars in military technology that the United States had spent a generation developing. A duck-hunting shotgun from 1937. And that's what the history of warfare teaches, over and over again. In every era, in every conflict, on every battlefield, the weapon that matters is never the most impressive one. It's the one that works when nothing else does. The one that fits the problem no one planned for. The one that some engineer designed for a completely different purpose, in a completely different time, for a completely different world. And that turned out to be exactly what was needed when everything else failed. Sometimes ugly is what keeps you alive. If you want to know about another weapon that was underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed until it changed the rules of combat entirely, subscribe to this channel. That's the kind of story we tell here. The weapons that history forgot, the ones that don't look like much until you understand what they actually did. And if there's a weapon you think deserves its own video, one that nobody's telling the real story about, drop it in the comments. I read every single one.